In the quiet hum of a small town afternoon, sunlight warmed the faded paint of the single gas station off the highway. Mr. Arthur Jenkins, a man whose age sat lightly on his shoulders like a familiar blanket, topped off the tank of his old pickup truck. His movements were slow, deliberate, the kind born of routine and a certain quiet patience the world seemed to have forgotten. His hands, gnarled slightly by time but still steady, handled the nozzle with practiced ease. He wore simple work clothes, faded denim, and a worn cap that shielded his eyes, making him look like any other man who had spent a lifetime living close to the land. He was unassuming, a figure easily overlooked in the hurried rush of modern life, which was precisely how he preferred it. The small town itself, Oakhaven, nestled among rolling hills, possessed a similar air of faded tranquility. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, or at least their pickup truck. Lately, however, a shadow had begun to stretch over Oakhaven's quiet corners. A different kind of noise had arrived, louder and more disruptive than the gentle murmur of local life. It arrived now, rattling the very air. A procession of heavy motorcycles roared into the gas station parking lot, their engines spitting a defiant, aggressive thrum. They were big, loud machines, ridden by men who seemed determined to match their mounts in sheer, unpleasant presence. Patches adorned their leather vests, symbols of a gang known regionally for its heavy-handed tactics and casual cruelty, the Iron Vultures. Their arrival shattered the peace, turning heads and tightening muscles in the few other patrons present. Mr. Jenkins didn't immediately turn. He finished hanging the nozzle, screwed his gas cap back on, and calmly latched the cover. Only then did he turn, a slow pivot that surveyed the newcomers without giving away any reaction. His gaze was neutral, observant. The lead biker, a hulking man with a snarling face and a greasy, matted beard, cut his engine directly behind Mr. Jenkins' truck, forcing the old man to wait. Two other bikers parked ostentatiously across several spaces, blocking easy access for others. The air filled with the smell of exhaust, stale sweat, and cheap cologne. The leader, whose vest bore the rank of Sergeant at Arms, swung a thick leg over his bike and swaggered forward, his heavy boots crunching on the gravel. He stopped a few feet from Mr. Jenkins, arms crossed over his chest, a sneer twisting his lips. His eyes, small and piggy, raked over the old man's worn clothes and quiet posture. "Move it, old-timer," the biker grunted, his voice a rough growl. "Got places to be, pumps to use." Mr. Jenkins remained still. He looked at the biker, then at the two others who had dismounted and were watching with smirks. One of them idly kicked at a discarded plastic bottle near the pumps. "Plenty of other pumps," Mr. Jenkins said, his voice soft, level, without any hint of challenge or fear. "And I'm not blocking anything. Just finished up." The sergeant at arms took a step closer, invading Mr. Jenkins' personal space. He leaned down slightly, his sneer widening. "Did you hear me, Grandpa? I said move. My boys are thirsty, and we don't wait for no one, especially not dusty old relics like you." He punctuated the last word with a sharp, dismissive wave of his hand near Mr. Jenkins' face. Mr. Jenkins' eyes, which had seemed a mild, indeterminate color a moment before, focused. A flicker, almost imperceptible, changed them. They became sharp, assessing, like polished stones. The softness vanished, replaced by an intense, focused awareness. It was a look that had been forged in places far from quiet gas stations and small towns. Mr. Jenkins said, still quiet, but a subtle shift in his stance, a centering of his weight, suggested an underlying tension, coiled and ready. "You should learn some manners. And some respect." The biker recoiled slightly, surprised by the unexpected firmness in the old man's tone. Then, he threw back his head and laughed, a harsh, barking sound joined by his companions. "Respect?" the biker leader roared, wiping a tear from his eye. "This old clown is talking about respect. You think you're gonna teach me anything, Pops?" He puffed out his chest, displaying the Iron Vulture patch. "We take respect. And whatever else we want." He reached out, a deliberate, insulting gesture, and shoved Mr. Jenkins lightly in the chest. "Now get lost before I decide you need a little lesson yourself." It happened quickly. Too quickly for the biker to register. Mr. Jenkins didn't stumble from the shove. Instead, his hand shot out, not with force, but with uncanny speed and precision. His fingers wrapped around the biker's wrist, the one that had shoved him, in a grip that felt less like flesh and bone and more like steel cable. The biker's smirk vanished, replaced by a look of startled confusion, then pain. Mr. Jenkins twisted the wrist sharply, expertly targeting a pressure point. The sergeant-at-arms cried out, a choked, undignified sound, and dropped to one knee, his arm bent at an unnatural angle. "I tried," Mr. Jenkins said, his voice still quiet, almost conversational, but carrying an absolute authority that froze the other bikers. "I tried to tell you." The two watching bikers stared, slack-jawed for a second, before rage ignited in their eyes. "Hey," one yelled, grabbing a heavy wrench from a saddlebag. The other reached for a chain. Mr. Jenkins didn't release the leader's wrist. He shifted, using the kneeling biker as a partial shield, his eyes tracking the incoming threats. The biker with the wrench swung it in a wide arc, aiming for Mr. Jenkins' head. Mr. Jenkins moved with startling agility, fluid and fast. He ducked under the swing, pulling the kneeling biker into the path of the wrench, which clanged harmlessly off the man's leather vest. As the attacker overextended, Mr. Jenkins released the leader's wrist and spun, his foot coming up in a swift, economical kick to the wrench-wielding biker's knee. There was a sickening crunch, and the man went down with a howl of agony, dropping the wrench. The third biker, younger and quicker, swung the chain. Mr. Jenkins sidestepped the initial swing, letting the weighted chain whistle past his ear. He didn't try to grab it. Instead, he closed the distance instantly, weaving under the man's guard. A short, brutal punch, delivered with surprising power to the solar plexus, doubled the chain wielder over, gasping. As the man folded, Mr. Jenkins delivered a quick, precise chop to the back of his neck. The biker crumpled, unconscious, the chain clattering to the ground. It was over in less time than it takes to fill a gas tank. Three large, aggressive men, part of a feared gang, lay groaning or unconscious on the ground around Mr. Jenkins' truck. Mr. Jenkins straightened slowly. He rubbed his hands together as if dusting them off. He glanced at the downed bikers, then back at the leader, who was clutching his wrist, his face pale with pain and shock, staring up at the old man with wide, disbelieving eyes. "You made a mistake, Mr. Jenkins said softly. "A real bad one." He didn't sound angry, only weary. The leader of the Iron Vultures, who had expected an easy target, an old man to bully for his amusement, could only stare. Fear, cold and unfamiliar, was starting to override his pain. This wasn't just some old man. This was something else. Something dangerous. He scrambled backward on the gravel, trying to get away. You broke my wrist," he gasped, the swagger completely gone. "Could have been worse," Mr. Jenkins replied. "Consider it a lesson." About respect, he looked at the other two bikers, one writhing in pain, the other limp. "Tell your friends. Oakhaven isn't open for your kind of business. Not anymore." Mr. Jenkins walked calmly to the driver's side of his truck, got in, and started the engine. He backed the truck up slowly, carefully avoiding the downed bikers. He drove away, leaving the sergeant-at-arms sitting on the ground, his gang members scattered around him like discarded toys, the only sound the distant thrum of Mr. Jenkins' departing pickup and the pained groans of the defeated. The few witnesses at the gas station emerged from their cars, their faces a mixture of shock, awe, and disbelief. They had seen the Iron Vultures intimidate people before, but they had never seen anyone stand up to them, let alone handle them with such swift, quiet efficiency. They watched Mr. Jenkins' truck disappear down the road, the legend of the unassuming old man and the broken bikers beginning to spread like wildfire. Word of the incident at the gas station traveled fast in Oakhaven. By the time the local sheriff, a decent but often overwhelmed man named Sheriff Brody, arrived, the scene was just the three battered bikers, their motorcycles scattered, and a handful of stunned witnesses. Sheriff Brody knew the Iron Vultures. He knew the fear they inspired. And he knew that whoever had done this wasn't someone to be trifled with. When witnesses described the old man and his calm, devastating efficiency, Sheriff Brody rubbed his chin. An old man. Taking down 3 vultures, including their sergeant-at-arms. It sounded impossible, but the evidence was right there. He had a feeling Oakhaven's quiet was about to get a lot more complicated. The Iron Vulture's sergeant-at-arms, nursing a heavily splinted wrist and a bruised ego that hurt far worse, recounted the incident to his chapter president, a man named Hammer. Hammer was older, meaner, and far more calculating than his subordinate. He listened, his face darkening like a storm cloud, as the sergeant-at-arms described the old man's impossible speed and skill. An old man? Hammer repeated, his voice low and dangerous. Took you and 2 others down like kindergartners? Yeah, Hammer. Like he was invisible until he hit you. Didn't make a sound. Just moved. And that grip. Felt like bone was crushing. The sergeant-at-arms shuddered. Hammer leaned back in his chair, the scarred leather creaking. His eyes, cold and hard, stared at the ceiling. No one in Oakhaven had ever dared stand up to them like this. Not the police, certainly not the scared townsfolk. This was an insult. A challenge that couldn't be ignored. It wasn't just about 3 downed bikers, it was about their reputation, their control over the area. Oakhaven was a strategic point for some of their less-than-legal operations, a quiet route for certain shipments. If people started thinking they could resist, their whole operation in the region could be jeopardized. Find out who he is, Hammer ordered, his voice a low growl. Everything. Where he lives, who he knows. And send a message. A clear one. Oakhaven belongs to the Iron Vultures. And anyone who forgets that pays a price. He smiled, a thin, unpleasant expression that didn't reach his eyes. A very high price. Back in his small, neat house on the edge of town, Mr. Jenkins sat in his worn armchair, a cup of tea steaming beside him. The adrenaline from the gas station incident had faded, leaving behind a familiar weariness. He hadn't wanted trouble. All he wanted was to live out his days in peace. But peace, it seemed, was a luxury the world wasn't always willing to grant. Especially not when predators moved in. He knew the biker gang wouldn't let it go. Men like that, fueled by ego and a twisted sense of power, saw any challenge as an existential threat. They would retaliate. And they would bring more force next time. He wasn't naive. He had seen this pattern play out on different stages, with different actors, but the core motivation was always the same, dominance through fear. He sighed softly. Retirement from his previous life had been a conscious choice, a deliberate step away from conflict and violence. He had seen too much, done too much. He craved stillness, anonymity. But the skills, the instincts, they weren't things you could simply switch off. They were part of him, honed by years of rigorous training and brutal necessity. They lay dormant, like a bear hibernating, but the sound of aggression, the scent of injustice, could wake them in an instant. He thought about the townspeople. He'd seen the fear in their faces, the way they averted their eyes when the bikers arrived. They were good people, mostly, hardworking and kind. They deserved to live without being extorted, intimidated, or worse. Leaving them to the vultures felt wrong. It went against everything he had ever fought for. His hand idly touched a faint scar on his forearm, hidden beneath his sleeve. A memory flickered, brief and sharp, the searing heat of a desert sun, the taste of dust, the weight of a rifle, the absolute necessity of decisive action. It was a lifetime ago, in a different uniform, fighting a different enemy. But the principle was the same. Protect the innocent. Stand against tyranny, no matter the size. He finished his tea, the the simple warmth a contrast to the cold calculations beginning to form in his mind. If the iron vultures wanted a war, he wouldn't run. Not this time. But he couldn't fight them alone. Not the whole chapter. They were too numerous, too entrenched. He would need help. Allies. He stood up, the slight stiffness in his joints a reminder of his age, but the look in his eyes was centuries younger, sharp and determined. He walked to a locked cabinet in his study, opening it not to reveal hunting rifles, but something else. Something that hadn't seen the light of day in years. Tell us where you're watching from. Drop a comment below and let us know which part of the world you're joining us from. If you're enjoying this story and want more like it, make sure to hit that subscribe button. It really helps the channel. Mr. Jenkins spent the next couple of days doing something he hadn't done in a long time, making inquiries. Quiet ones, through old, almost forgotten channels. He wasn't looking for official help. The vultures likely had enough local contacts bought or intimidated to make that difficult. He was looking for something else. A specific kind of person. Someone who understood what he understood. Someone with a particular set of skills. His search led him to a small, unassuming repair shop on the other side of the next county. The sign above the door read, Veteran Auto and Cycle Repair. The owner was a man named Marcus Thorne, a former Army Ranger. Marcus was younger than Mr. Jenkins by a couple of decades, barrel-chested, with a quiet intensity in his eyes that Mr. Jenkins recognized instantly. Mr. Jenkins walked into the shop, the smell of oil and grease thick in the air. Marcus looked up from under the hood of a classic Mustang, wiping his hands on a rag. His eyes lingered on Mr. Jenkins for a moment longer than necessary. There was something about the old man's posture, the way he held himself, that felt familiar. Morning, Marcus said, his voice calm. Looking for repairs? Morning, Mr. Jenkins replied. Something like that. I was. Recommended. He used a specific phrase, a piece of old, subtle code known only among a select few. Marcus paused, the rag still in his hand. His expression didn't change, but the intensity in his eyes deepened. He knew that phrase. He finished wiping his hands and stepped out from behind the car. Come on back, Marcus said, leading Mr. Jenkins into a small, cluttered office at the back of the shop. He closed the door. Take a seat. Mr. Jenkins sat in a worn swivel chair. My name is Arthur Jenkins, he said. I'm in Oakhaven. Having a little trouble with some folks. He described the iron vultures, their presence, their intimidation, and the incident at the gas station. He didn't boast, he simply stated the facts. Marcus listened, his face impassive. He knew about the iron vultures too. Their reputation extended beyond Oakhaven. Took 3 of them down, including the sergeant at arms, Marcus said, not a question, a statement of fact. Heard about that. Sounded like a ghost story. The way they tell it, didn't know what hit them. They didn't, Mr. Jenkins confirmed. They expect people to roll over. When they don't know how to process it. And now they'll be coming back with friends, Marcus finished, nodding slowly. Probably the whole damn chapter. Maybe more. That's my assessment, Mr. Jenkins said. They see Oakhaven as territory. A challenge to their control is a challenge to their existence. They'll escalate. Hard. And the people there. They can't fight back. Not against that. Marcus looked at Mr. Jenkins again, a long, assessing gaze. You're one of them, aren't you? He asked, using another piece of the shared language. Mr. Jenkins nodded. Retired, he clarified. Or trying to be. But some things you can't ignore. Marcus understood. He had tried to retire too. Civilian life was quiet, safe, but it lacked the same clear purpose, the same sense of absolute right and wrong. He had found a measure of peace working with his hands, fixing things, but the warrior part of him was still there, deep down. "They'll torch the town," Marcus said, stating the likely outcome if the vultures weren't stopped decisively. "Extort everyone, turn it into their personal fiefdom. Or burn it to the ground to make an example." "Precisely," Mr. Jenkins agreed. "I won't stand by and let that happen. But as I said, I can't do it alone. I need help. People who know how to handle this kind of problem. Quietly. Effectively." Marcus leaned forward. "How many are we talking about?" "The chapter?" "Intel suggests around 30 regulars," Mr. Jenkins said. "Plus associates, hangers-on. They've got connections. Might call in reinforcements from other chapters or other interests." Marcus whistled softly. 30 against us. "Us," Mr. Jenkins repeated, a faint smile touching his lips. "And whoever else we can gather. I was hoping you might know some people. Guys who are restless. Looking for a purpose." Marcus grinned, a flash of white teeth in his oil-stained face. "Restless? Mr. Jenkins, I know a few. Guys who thought they left the fight behind, but the fight never really leaves you. Especially not when there's predators picking on the weak." Over the next few days, Marcus made calls. He reached out to a few trusted men he knew from his ranger days, guys who were now scattered across different states, trying to build civilian lives. He spoke in guarded terms, referencing a situation, a problem that needed handling, a chance to do some good. He told them about Mr. Jenkins, using descriptors that would resonate: old school, legend, the real deal. One by one, they agreed to come. There was Sergeant Major Reyes, a tough-as-nails combat engineer now running a small construction business. Corporal Anya Sharma, a former Intel analyst with a knack for cracking systems and gathering information, currently working as a cybersecurity consultant. Specialist Javier Rodriguez, an explosives and demolitions expert who now designed theatrical special effects. They were civilians now, but they were still soldiers at heart, bound by a shared history and an unspoken code. They arrived separately in Oakhaven over the following week, blending in as much as possible. They looked like ordinary people, a construction worker, a tech consultant, a stagehand. No one looking at them would suspect the depth of their skills, the years of training, the shared experiences of facing down danger. They met discreetly at Mr. Jenkins' house in the evenings, poring over maps of Oakhaven, discussing the Iron Vulture's known hangouts, their patterns, the businesses they were shaking down. Anya, using her skills, managed to access some public records and even some less-than-public online activity linked to known Vulture associates, piecing together a clearer picture of their operation. It wasn't just local muscle, there were signs of connection to larger criminal networks, hints of drug running and possibly other illicit activities using Oakhaven as a hub. "They're not just a biker gang," Anya reported one evening, her laptop screen displaying complex network diagrams. "They're a branch. Connected to something bigger. The money flows out, and something else flows in. Through Oakhaven." This revelation heightened the stakes significantly. This wasn't just about protecting a town from local bullies. They were disrupting a supply line, attracting the attention of potentially far more dangerous players. Meanwhile, the Iron Vultures were making their presence felt. Incensed by the humiliation at the gas station and determined to reassert their dominance, they ramped up their activities. They vandalized businesses that refused to pay protection money, beat up a local who had spoken out against them, and drove their motorcycles menacingly through residential streets late at night, the noise a constant reminder of their power. Fear tightened its grip on Oakhaven again. Sheriff Brody and his small force were stretched thin, trying to keep order but lacking the resources or manpower to effectively confront the vultures head-on. The gang members were brazen, almost untouchable. One evening, 2 vultures firebombed the diner owned by Mr. Jenkins' neighbor, a kind woman named Martha who had always offered Mr. Jenkins an extra slice of pie. The flames leaping against the night sky were a stark, brutal message. This wasn't just intimidation anymore, it was open warfare. Mr. Jenkins stood with his allies and other townspeople, watching the firefighters battle the blaze. Martha wept, her life's work going up in smoke. The faces of the townspeople were a mixture of horror and despair. "They want to break us," a man muttered, his voice thick with emotion. "They want us to give up." Mr. Jenkins watched the flames, his face grim. He felt a familiar cold anger settle deep in his gut. This was why he couldn't stay retired. This casual destruction, this infliction of pain on innocent people, was anathema to him. Back at his house, the allies gathered, the mood somber but resolute. "They crossed a line tonight," Marcus said, his jaw tight. "Burning Martha's diner. That was deliberate. Cruel. They're escalating," Anya confirmed. "Trying to terrorize the town into submission. They know we're here, they know we're resisting, but they don't know who we are. They're trying to flush us out, or just break the town's will so we have nothing left to fight for." Javier, usually quiet, spoke up. "We need to hit them back. Harder. Not just defend. Disrupt." Mr. Jenkins nodded. "Javier is right. Defense won't be enough. They'll keep coming, keep spreading fear. We need to take the fight to them. On our terms." He spread the map of Oakhaven and the surrounding area on the table. "Anya's intel shows their main base of operations is the old abandoned mill on the edge of town. That's where they store whatever they're moving. And it's where Hammer spends most of his time. They also have a couple of smaller hangouts, places they use for staging or storing bikes. Hitting the mill head-on is risky," Marcus cautioned. "Could be heavily fortified, maybe booby-trapped." "Agreed," Mr. Jenkins said. "We don't have the numbers for a direct assault. Not yet. But we don't need to take the mill by force. We need to make them think it's under threat. Draw them out. Divide their forces." He outlined his plan. It was audacious, relying on misdirection, timing, and leveraging the Allies' specific skills. Javier's expertise wasn't just in demolitions, he was a master of creating effects, diversions, controlled chaos. Anya could use her tech skills to manipulate local systems, cause temporary blackouts, disrupt communications at key moments. Marcus and the others were the muscle, the direct action component, but they wouldn't be used in a frontal assault. Instead, they would conduct surgical strikes on the smaller hangouts, coordinated to occur almost simultaneously, creating confusion and forcing Hammer to deploy his forces to multiple locations. The goal, Mr. Jenkins explained, his finger tapping the map, isn't to eliminate them in these initial strikes. It's to scatter them. To make Hammer paranoid. To convince him that his main operation at the mill is vulnerable. "And then?" Marcus asked. "Then we wait," Mr. Jenkins said. "Hammer won't tolerate perceived weakness at the mill. He'll consolidate his remaining forces there. He'll call in reinforcements if he has them. He'll turn the mill into a fortress. And when he feels secure, when he thinks he's weathered our initial storm. That's when we hit him," Anya finished, a spark of understanding in her eyes. "Precisely," Mr. Jenkins said. "We lure the lion into a cage of our own making. And that cage," his finger moved from the mill to a less conspicuous location on the map, a series of old, disused drainage tunnels that ran beneath the edge of town, connecting to a larger, overgrown culvert system. "That cage will be where we have the advantage." The plan was set. The Allies spent the next few days preparing, gathering supplies, finalizing timings, going over contingencies. They were a small group, but they were highly trained, disciplined, and motivated. Each brought a piece of the puzzle, fitting together seamlessly under Mr. Jenkins' calm, strategic direction. He didn't bark orders, he suggested, guided, and trusted his team implicitly. They, in turn, trusted him completely. They had heard whispers of his past, vague rumors of a man who could walk through fire and come out untouched, a ghost who got the job done. Seeing him in action, seeing the clarity of his mind and the quiet competence with which he planned, solidified their faith. As the Allies prepared to execute their plan, Hammer, the Iron Vulture's president, was indeed becoming more and more agitated. The news from Oakhaven was infuriating. His sergeant-at-arms was useless with a broken wrist, 2 other men were recovering, and now, rumors were swirling. Rumors of an old man, a phantom who moved like smoke, taking down his best fighters. The burning of Martha's diner hadn't had the desired effect of cowering the town. If anything, it seemed to have stiffened some spines, though quietly. And now, his scouts were reporting strange things, disruptions, small incidents that seemed unconnected but added up to a disturbing pattern. A bike left parked unattended vanished, only to be found days later, stripped for parts miles away. A known drug drop point was found empty, the merchandise gone, no signs of forced entry. A Vulture associate's phone was hacked, his contacts deleted. It was subtle, professional work, not the kind of resistance he expected from frightened civilians. "Someone's playing games," Hammer snarled, slamming a fist on a table in the mill office. "Who the hell is doing this? The cops? They don't have the guts." "We don't know," Hammer, his lieutenant, a scarred man named Knuckles, reported. "No witnesses. No leads. It's like they know our moves before we make them." Hammer paced, his heavy boots echoing in the large, dusty space. The mill was ideal, isolated, defensible, plenty of room for their bikes and their inventory. But if someone was out there, systematically dismantling their operations, it was a vulnerability he couldn't ignore. That old man at the gas station. Maybe he wasn't alone. Maybe he was connected. But to what? A rival gang? Unlikely. Oakhaven wasn't that valuable to draw that kind of attention. Former military? The rumors of the old man's skill hinted at it, but why here? Why Oakhaven? Paranoia began to set in. Hammer didn't like feeling exposed, feeling like someone was watching him, picking at his operations. He decided to bring more men into the mill, reinforce their perimeter. He'd also contact their suppliers further up the chain, inform them of the disruption, and ask for advice, maybe even backup, from their associates. The stakes were rising, and Hammer felt the familiar urge to crush whatever resistance was forming before it became a real threat. He wouldn't be caught off guard. He would make the mill a fortress, and dare anyone to challenge him there. The night the plan was set in motion was moonless, the darkness thick and heavy over Oakhaven. Mr. Jenkins and his allies moved with the quiet confidence of seasoned professionals. Marcus and 2 others targeted the Vulture's secondary hangout, a derelict warehouse near the train tracks. Anya, from a remote location, used a carefully crafted virus to disable the warehouse's rudimentary security cameras and jam local cell signals around the area. Javier, meanwhile, planted a series of small, precisely timed charges designed not to destroy, but to create maximum disorientation and panic at another Vulture spot, a back room in a seedy bar on the other side of town. At the warehouse, Marcus and his team breached the flimsy back door silently. They weren't there for a drawn-out fight. They were there to sabotage. Tires were slashed, bikes tampered with, and a small, non-explosive incendiary device was placed near a stash of paperwork, designed to start a small, visible fire that would require attention but wouldn't burn the building down. It was a hit-and-run, designed to be fast and confusing. Across town, Javier's charges went off, a series of sharp, cracking sounds designed to mimic gunfire from multiple directions, followed by a puff of non-toxic smoke and a temporary disruption of the bar's power. Chaos erupted inside as the Vulture's presence panicked, convinced they were under attack. The reports reached Hammer at the mill almost simultaneously. "Warehouse is hit. Fire started. Bar's going crazy. Sounds like a shootout." Hammer roared in frustration. They were being attacked, but piecemeal, spread out. Who was doing this? It was coordinated, that much was clear. He had to respond. Knuckles. Take 10 men. Get to the warehouse. See what the hell's going on. And Bones, you take 5. Check out the bar. Secure the perimeter here. Nobody leaves. This is a distraction. They're trying to draw us out. Hammer's assumption was correct in principle, it was a distraction, but he fell for the trap all the same. He sent out nearly half his available force, dividing his strength just as Mr. Jenkins had planned. His paranoia about the mill being the ultimate target solidified, he kept his remaining men close, fortifying the perceived stronghold. As Knuckles and Bones sped off with their detachments, Mr. Jenkins, Anya, and Javier were already in position near the old drainage culvert. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and stagnant water. The entrance to the culvert was a large, concrete mouth hidden by overgrown bushes. It looked like nothing more than a drainage ditch to the untrained eye. Inside, it was dark, cool, and smelled faintly of mildew. Mr. Jenkins moved with surprising agility, his steps silent on the concrete floor. Javier had rigged a few low-light indicators, just enough to show the path. Anya, meanwhile, was monitoring communications, listening to the vulture's frantic chatter. Hammer split his forces, Anya whispered, her voice echoing slightly. Knuckles and 10 heading towards the warehouse. Bones and 5 at the bar. Hammer's hunkered down at the mill with maybe 15 guys, tops. Good, Mr. Jenkins murmured. The plan was working. They had isolated the head of the snake. He thinks he's safe in his fortress. Now we bring the fortress to him. Their target wasn't the mill itself, but the ground beneath it, or rather, the connecting points between the mill and the culvert system. Javier's real expertise lay in understanding structures and how to destabilize them with minimal effort. He had spent hours studying old town blueprints, tracing the forgotten network of tunnels and pipes. Moving through the echoing darkness of the culvert, they reached a point directly beneath the mill. The sound of heavy machinery, voices, and distant motorcycle engines rumbled faintly above. Javier got to work, placing charges with meticulous care. These weren't for show. These were designed to collapse a specific section of the mill's foundation and floor, creating a localized cave-in that would trap those inside and render the building useless as a stronghold, but without bringing the entire structure down. Charges set, Javier reported, wiping sweat from his brow. Timed fuse. 10 minutes. Enough time for us to get clear, but not enough for them to figure out what's happening. They retreated back down the culvert, the rumbling above growing louder as the vultures at the mill, aware now that something was happening but unsure what, moved around frantically. As they emerged from the culvert and melted back into the darkness of the surrounding woods, a series of muffled roars erupted from the direction of the mill. The ground trembled slightly. Dust plumed into the sky, visible even in the dim light. They heard distant shouts, screams, and the sound of collapsing debris. Direct hit, Javier stated, a grim satisfaction in his voice. That section's gone. They're trapped in there now. No way in or out through that area. The plan had worked flawlessly. The initial strikes had drawn out the vultures' numbers, leaving Hammer with a manageable force. The strategic collapse of the mill's foundation hadn't killed them, but it had incapacitated their base and trapped the core leadership. Now came the next phase. The vultures who had been dispatched to the warehouse and the bar returned to find their main base partially collapsed and surrounded by confusion. They were leaderless and scattered. Sheriff Brody, alerted by the fire and the subsequent commotion, arrived on the scene with every officer he could muster, finding a scene of chaos and injured bikers. The power dynamics in Oakhaven had shifted violently and unexpectedly. Hammer and his trapped vultures were eventually extricated from the collapsed section of the mill, injured, disoriented, and furious, but no longer in control. They were met by Sheriff Brody and his officers, who, though surprised by the state of the mill, were quick to secure the scene and apprehend the remaining vultures. The investigation into the mill revealed not only the cause of the collapse, expertly placed charges, but also the extent of the Iron Vulture's criminal enterprise in Oakhaven, the hidden compartments, the inventory of stolen goods, the stash of drugs, the weapons. Anya's earlier intel was proven right, this was much bigger than a local gang. The capture of Hammer and the core of his chapter, combined with the disruption of their operations caused by Marcus and Javier's actions, crippled the Iron Vulture's hold on Oakhaven. The remaining scattered members, leaderless and facing increased law enforcement attention, quickly dispersed or were rounded up. In the days that followed, Oakhaven began to breathe again. The fear that had hung over the town like a shroud started to dissipate. People emerged from their homes, talking openly, helping each other. There was still damage, Martha's diner was a blackened shell, but there was also a sense of defiant resilience, a newfound unity forged in the face of adversity. Sheriff Brody, overseeing the cleanup and the ongoing investigation, knew that the official report wouldn't tell the whole story. He'd found evidence of expertly placed charges at the mill, sabotage at the warehouse, and bizarre, localized disruptions at the bar. He also had the accounts of the stunned witnesses from the gas station. And he had a strong suspicion that the unassuming elderly man, Mr. Arthur Jenkins, was somehow at the center of it all. But there was no concrete proof linking him to the events, and frankly, Sheriff Brody wasn't looking for any. Sometimes, justice came in forms the law couldn't officially acknowledge, delivered by people who operated outside the lines. He saw Mr. Jenkins a few days later, standing among the townsfolk helping to clear debris from around Martha's diner. Mr. Jenkins was quietly handing out bottles of water, his presence calm and steady. Sheriff Brody walked over. "Mr. Jenkins," Sheriff Brody said, offering a hand. "Sheriff Brody. I wanted to thank you for everything," he emphasized the last word subtly. Mr. Jenkins took his hand, his grip firm. "Just a neighbor helping out, Sheriff," he said, his eyes holding a quiet understanding. "There's been a lot happening," Sheriff Brody continued, glancing towards the distant, partially collapsed mill. "Strange things. Effective things." Mr. Jenkins nodded. "Sometimes," he said softly, "things just happen. When people have had enough." Sheriff Brody held his gaze for a moment. He saw not just an old man, but a depth, a quiet power that resonated. He thought about the chaos at the gas station, the professional execution of the strikes, the crippling blow to the vultures. He put it all together. He understood. Standing there, in the aftermath of the conflict, with the sun warming his face and the sound of a rebuilding community around him, Sheriff Brody did something instinctive, something that felt like the right, true response to the quiet force standing before him. He straightened up, brought his hand to his brow, and rendered a sharp, respectful salute to Mr. Arthur Jenkins. Mr. Jenkins held his gaze for a moment longer, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching his lips. He gave a small, acknowledging nod. The salute was understood, accepted. It was a silent recognition of a shared purpose, a different kind of service. Sheriff Brody lowered his hand. "Oakhaven owes you," he said simply. "Oakhaven owes itself," Mr. Jenkins replied. "For remembering what it means to stand together." Marcus, Anya, and Javier, watching from nearby, saw the exchange. They saw the sheriff's salute, the old man's quiet acceptance. They understood too. Their work was done. Oakhaven was safe. They would slip away as quietly as they had arrived, returning to their civilian lives, ready if called upon again. Martha, watching Mr. Jenkins, approached him later. "Arthur," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you. For everything. I don't know how." Mr. Jenkins placed a gentle hand on her arm. "Don't worry about that, Martha," he said. "The vultures are gone. They won't be back. And we'll rebuild the diner. The whole town will help." And they did. In the weeks and months that followed, Oakhaven transformed. The fear was replaced by a quiet confidence. Neighbors looked out for neighbors. The burned-out shell of Martha's diner became a symbol of their resilience, rebuilt brick by the community working together. The iron vultures were gone, their regional operation dismantled, their reputation shattered. The incident at the gas station became a legend, whispered with awe, the story of the old man who taught the bullies a lesson about respect. Mr. Jenkins returned to his quiet routine. He still pumped his own gas, still wore his unassuming clothes. But there was a difference now. The townspeople looked at him differently. There was respect in their eyes, understanding, gratitude. They didn't know the details, not really, but they knew he had been the catalyst for change, the quiet force that had protected them. He would still sit in his armchair in the evenings, sipping tea. The memory of fire, of conflict, was still there, a part of his past he couldn't erase. But now, it was overlaid with the image of a community united, a future rebuilt. He had sought peace, and in defending Oakhaven, he had found a different kind of peace, the peace of knowing he had done what was right, that he had used his skills, not for destruction, but for protection and justice. The quiet life he craved was finally within reach, earned not by avoiding the fight, but by facing it head-on, one last time. Tomorrow we have special story for you, so make sure you subscribe to our channel so you don't miss it. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so your like would be highly appreciated. Up next you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.